Ok, goedenamiddag, good afternoon. Heureuse d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Mon nom est Isabel Ferreras. Je suis directrice. J'ai l'honneur d'être la directrice de la classe Technologie et Société de l'Académie royale de Belgique. Et je suis... Oh, thank you, Luc. Thank you. So I'm Isabel Ferreras. I'm the director of the class Technology and Society of the Royal Academy of Belgium. I'm super pleased to be with you and in awe with the work of my colleagues to get this day ready for us to think about these super important issues. Now we are hitting the third session of the day, which is again a very thick session. You have understood by now that we work with a dual approach. First, you will hear from experts who have a very precise expert knowledge about one part of the problem that we are looking at, who will bring their knowledge so that we can really nurture our own understanding of the problems. And then we will have a panel of experts who will reflect on the content that we heard, and who will address critically the issues that this session as a whole is dealing with. So this third session will take up what we could call the big ethical questions that are behind our day. Our hypothesis for this session is that technological innovation should serve the common good of humanity and not just serve for the good of the rich countries or just for the rich within the rich countries. So how can we make sure that technological innovation reaches those who need it most? Obviously, these concerns are not the concerns of the market. So how can we move ahead with those concerns? We're going to tackle the questions via three dimensions. Technological innovation for whom, by whom, and for what? Technological innovation for whom? Well, we recognize that Europe has an important historical and moral responsibility towards least developed countries, obviously, but also towards the next generations. In this context, it's clear that engineers and technology have a fundamental role to play in enabling this development in a respectful, balanced, and ethically sound relationship. So technological innovation for whom? Second dimension, technological innovation by whom? Here, open source IT shows a way which could be extended to many other technical fields. And one important aspect in this example is the central role that IT workers play in designing the software. They are at the center of decisions made to develop the product. Here we should clearly see the fundamental role of human beings, the fundamental role that actually human beings play in the possibility for innovation. People, workers, whom we could call labor investors, actually are the key to meeting the challenges that we face today. And here, let me note that the issues of gender parity, as mentioned this morning, and equity is absolutely critical to address. And last but not least, technological innovation for what? In the face of global existential challenges, new models of international cooperation must be implemented. To serve a higher purpose, technological innovation cannot just serve the wealthiest countries. And certainly when we face the big challenge that today we face for the common good of humanity at a time of climate collapse. So in the panel now, we're going to hear from three experts. The first one, Peter Traxler, is an engineer, professor at the Rotterdam University of Applied, I should do that? Yes, Applied Sciences. Peter has been working at the intersection between business administration, society, and technology. Then Professor Marnik van Klooster, who's an engineer, also professor at the University of Louvain and researcher at the Earth and Life Institute with an extensive experience in the sustainability of agricultural system. And last but not least, Michel Goldman, professor emeritus at the University of Brussels, president of the I3H Institute and member of the Royal Academy of Medicine, will address us on public-private partnerships in the context of global health. Thank you to the three of them, and now I leave you the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. While we wait for the slides to appear, I'm going to talk to you about a sustainable approach inspired by IT, open source technologies. Open source, I believe, can be a key ingredient for the distribution of technology and has proven successful in software. The idea has also gained interest in hardware over the last 2 decades. Yet its development might seem slow, like the appearance of the slides. Not only tooling varies across the globe, raw materials vary, standards, parts, the manufacturing expertise varies widely. Projects tend to fork rather than to converge, leading to partial and local optimizations. This will be the last slide with a lot of text in it, believe me. Recent research with Fab Labs that we've carried out studies communities, business models, and business life cycles rather than just technology. I believe that such an approach increases the utility of open source hardware as intermediary technology. So to start with, if we look back in history, 18th, 19th century, even early 20th century, technology development used to be, in fact, open source. Engineers were copying their designs and improving on them. You see, for instance, on the left-hand side, blast furnaces here at Bliss Hill in Shropshire. You see the Wright Flyer in 1903. Only aggressive patenting of technical innovations stopped the collaboration of engineers in these cases. And we've seen the same thing in IT. The famous PDP-10 you see pictured. Some of you might remember those things. That's when programmers used to share code. And then the VAX came and everything changed. Until the 1980s, when these guys, your typical elderly white guys, I'm sorry, Richard Stallman, you recognize probably on the left, Eric Raymond in the center, and Linus Torvalds, started to invent tricks to circumvent the copyright on software by inventing standard licenses that allowed everyone again to copy. And it's these things that, as open source, are the powerful engines behind the internet. And Log4j has become a little bit infamous last year, December 9th. Yeah, it was December 9th, when a 0-day vulnerability was announced. You might not know what Log4j is. Nobody would have known if there wasn't this incident. Log4j is a little robot, you can say, that logs stuff. It logs what happens on the iCloud, on Minecraft, on Steam, on Twitter, on Tenant, the Chinese direct message app. Just logging what happens, Very boring job. There's one crucial flaw in that little piece of software that made it so vulnerable that it has been declared the biggest, most critical vulnerability of the last decade. At one time, Eric Raymond proclaimed open source software, in open source software, all faults are shallow because there are 1,000 eyes that check the code. Wasn't in this case. So now open source is not the panacea to any and every problem, but it has the power of Apache to power the internet. We've seen nice logos appear, the open source hardware logo, which came from the open source hardware movement that started in 2002. In 2011, they created the logo, top right there, bottom right, the logo of the Open Source Hardware and Design Alliance, and left, the Open Source Hardware Association, which was founded in 2012. Now that sounds pretty abstract. Where do we find open source hardware in our environments? Here. Most famous, probably, top left, the RepRap project. University of Bath, remember 2006. Adrian Boyer started to develop a 3D printer that could print itself. And in fact, in 2008, that's the photo here. You see Adrian Bauer on the left with the parent machine, and Vic Oliver on the right with the machine that was printed by this first parent machine. Why is this thing so important? I'll come back to in my intervention several times in that project. Adrian Boyer started to develop this printer when a crucial patent in 3D printing was exhausted. So he could use the IP in that patent to produce an open source machine. Other open source hardware on the right-hand side of the picture is very much used in education. Top, the Arduino, in the center, the Raspberry Pi, down bottom, the microbit. Microbit has probably gained most attention. It's the youngest of the three projects, and is really used in primary schools to teach children electronics, computation. And this is an open source thing. Now, the other two pictures are also interesting. Let me start with bottom right. What you see there in the picture is a Bang & Olufsen speaker from, I probably think, the 1980s. Now, Bang & Olufsen has developed their sound systems, and all is wireless. So these good old speakers are of no use, except for that board that you can see leaning next to the speaker, which is an open source electronics board that links the old-fashioned speaker to the modern days digital technology, open source. And bottom center, this is a circuit that's part of a project at CERN. And we've had CERN coming along a couple of times today. The project is called White Rabbit. And I call it a stopwatch for subatomic particles, which is technically not exactly correct. The devices are used to synchronize all the apparatus along the large colliders via the internet, and tech people know that the internet is kind of flimsy when it comes to timing. But with these things, the people at CERN are able to synchronize devices over the internet at nanosecond level. And they were only able to produce this thing by making it open source, because that way they could share their designs when they were developing their designs with the actual manufacturers of these devices. And they could interact on the device without 800 pages of non-disclosure agreements. The tech transfer people at CERN didn't like this idea at the beginning, but I think in the meantime, they understood what they're doing there. More mundane things like cars, cargo bikes, and desks have also been open sourced. You might have seen the picture of the local motors rally fighter on the left. This company went just out of business January this year. They couldn't convince investors to continue on open source. The bikes are still made in Hamburg, Copenhagen, and in a little village in the Netherlands close to Aachen. And on the right-hand side, the Open Desk has been a very, very famous London-based project promoted by quite a few architects. And this desk is found in many, many startups in Google's offices and the kind like this. Now, one could say that, or I said at the beginning, that open source hardware might be developing a bit slow. If we look at timelines, the left one is the timeline of the development of the software Python, 1991 to 2006, which comes down to, you can do the calculations, 15 years. And the right-hand side is the development of the RepRap from 2006, when the guys started. 2008, we saw the first child of this thing. And then a funny thing happened. It sort of diverged into many, many different machines. I'll come back to that. But that process really took 6 years. Now, it might sound like a very clever idea to open source hardware. You know, you can ship recipes and people can make those things anywhere around the globe. But if we think making, and I took woodworking as an example, in the center you see a highly industrialized CNC woodworking machine. On the left-hand side, a much cheaper sort of hobbyist CNC router. And on the right-hand side, you see people working manually. So shipping digital recipes and translate them into different manufacturing infrastructures is still a challenge. And I've got this little example, again, staying in CNC. That's a hobby CNC router made by an artist, Taylor Hawkinson from Chicago. We read about this machine, and we had, in 2012, we had an Open Knowledge Festival in Helsinki, where making and hardware was part of it. And I thought, I'd invite Taylor Hawkinson to build such a machine together with us. So he came across the Atlantic with his drawings, just to find out that in Finland, we use metric measurements, not imperial. Just to find out that the standard wood sizes he used in his design are totally non-standard in Finland. So the compatibility of parts and materials across the globe and the quality of steel across the globe is not standard, as we might think. And then, of course, in hardware, waiting for the picture to appear. Yes, you see again on the right-hand side the development tree of the RepRap. Engineers tend to disagree on solutions. And rather than contribute to improving and having kind of a benevolent dictator enforcing that, as we have in software, they go and take the design and make it their own. They fork. And so from the RepRap, you see people in Utrecht build top left. They develop their own machine, bottom left, in laser cut plywood. From the original RepRap design, bottom center, the Prusa 3, a few years later, one of the most famous open source 3D printers, looks completely different. We've been researching the sort of the environment of businesses of open source hardware, and we came to 2 or 3 key insights. First, open source people think differently about value. They don't think linearly in value generation, delivery, and extraction. They think about value generation, preservation, and appropriation. I think that's a fundamental shift in thinking about business. They also don't only focus on the focal firm. They think upstream and downstream, and they think in communities. And the third thing we found with open source hardware businesses, which is again completely different to standard startups, they use business models that encompass various components: research and education, fabrication and customized design, retail, and art. So in conclusion, open source hardware offers the idea of a design global, manufacture local principle. And you see here the Wiki House, top left in Westminster, bottom left in Vienna, bottom right in Paris, and the other two pictures are scale models. Design global, manufacture local, but take into account the caveats of manufacturing capabilities and raw material parts and standards. Shared resources for manufacturing, shared machine spaces can help in local manufacturing. And to almost finish this example, when our governments put the whole world in lockdown in 2020 and the global supply chains collapsed, there was absolute scarcity in very simple personal protective equipment. And within only days, people regrouped. Those people who had their 3D printers at home from that dream of the 10 years ago, regrouped, communicated over the internet, and locally made hundreds of thousands of the face shields you see there on the right. So in conclusion, what we need is not just the symbols and products of open source hardware. We need to think about the interactions, and we need to think about the bigger systems. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So my name is Mrna Vaccines. So presentation, please. While we are waiting, so I'm going to talk about water. Water is life. Water is, of course, very important in the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I'm going to show you how how open science technology can be used to manage water resources. We'll first give a small contextualization of the problems, and then say, well, how can we use open science technology for challenging the water data issue? Then I'm going to say something also about irrigation and water sanitation and how we can do that also with novel technology. Now, to set the scene, of course, water is a major issue. Basic natural resources, we need it for everything. It is important for energy production, food production. It is multidimensional, but unfortunately under a lot of pressures. And just to give you some key figures, nowadays still 2 billion people lack good sanitation. Nearly 800 million people do not have access to drinking water. Each day there is 1,400 children that are actually dying due to lack of water sanitation. And the map that you see here is actually showing where all the water shortage problems are occurring. And you see clearly that it is in the global south that we have a lot of problems, particularly in Africa. Also, to say something about food security, we need to eat each day. And of course, agriculture production is very important. Agriculture is a major sector that is consuming water at a global scale. 80% of the global water resources are consumed by agriculture, and 60% of actually the food security of the food production is done in areas where there is not enough of water, where you need to add water artificially by irrigation. 40% of the cereal production is actually also done in these conditions. So if we would like to address water issues, food security, then we need to also look to irrigation, and that will be something that we are going to talk about. Now, if we would like to manage water resources at a global scale, we need, of course, to have data. And there is actually the problem that we have. We don't have enough data. Here, I'm just going to show you two maps showing the current status of two basic variables of the hydrological cycle. Precipitation. Precipitation can be measured by pluviometers. Here you see the map showing the density of the available pluviometers in the WMO databases. And you show clearly that, of course, in the United States, Europe, we have a lot of data available. Unfortunately, if you go to Africa and Latin America, and it's particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, there we have a lot of shortage of good precipitation data. So that means that, well, if we do not know how much it rains, then it's very difficult also to manage the water there. The same for the global runoff water, so the water that actually flows in the river. We have also some availability of data that are available. It's the same image, actually. It shows also that a lot of information is available in Europe and the United States, But if you go to the global south, then of course you're lacking data of flow in the rivers, in the canals, in the lakes. And this is actually very problematic if you would like to manage the resources in a correct way. So this is a serious problem. Data, we don't have it. So what can we do? Well, actually, we need to face this water data issue, and we can do it actually in 3 different ways. So I'm just going to show you some examples of how we can do it and on the projects that we are working on. The first thing is, of course, the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Water. So we have now smart technology that becomes available. Very often, if you're in southern countries, you have already a good internet, and of course, with the initiatives that are made by Elon Musk and his company, we'll have internet all over the world with a good coverage and a good power. And actually, well, if you have sensors available, which allows to communicate through this internet, then you can send this information about water parameters towards the server, and then you can, of course, through the internet, inform us about this kind of system. So just to give you an example, we are working on food production systems in Western Africa, rice production systems, which are cultivated in lowland systems, which are subjected to a lot of hydrological constraints, because sometimes it's too much water and sometimes too less water. So we would like to know how much water is available. While within this kind of lowland valley systems, we install this type of piezometers in which there are sensors, smart sensors. They are actually communicating by GRPS through the internet to a servers in a University of Parakou in Benin. And there, well, actually we can consult, also here at distance, we can consult the information of the water level in this lowland system, and that is very precious in order to understand, for instance, how much water is available over there. Just another type of strategy that we can develop is, of course, and that's really the open science, is the remote sensing technology. In 2017, Google took a very strong initiative to create the Google Earth platform. And thanks to that, actually, all at sudden, billions of data became available, were disclosed, satellite data, which were not available previously. And thanks to that, we can actually also now use all this open science data in order to characterize, assess the water resources also in remote areas. Here again, also in these lowland systems in Africa, where we're actually using remote sensing data from different producers, as well from the NASA as from the ESA. Google platform actually allows us to console this. We set up algorithms in order to come up with interpretation of this data with this type of information and technology. We can actually develop maps of some properties that are interested to us. So for instance, in this case, this is a time course of soil water, water that is available in the root zone of plants. And you know that, of course, it's in the root zone of the plants that water needs to be available to produce the plants. So what you see here is just a diachronic, a time series of maps of soil water within these lowland systems from 2019 until June 2022. It gives you the spatial distributions. You see that there is a rainy season and dry season, a rainy season and dry season. It gives you the spatial distribution of the soil water, and that can be used then to orient eventually the irrigation in order to optimize the water application in this kind of fields. Another kind of examples, of course, we can use this, but what does it work? Is it appropriate? Of course, we have tested this type of technology. We installed in these type of fields also sensors allowing to measure in an independent way the soil water. And if you then compare the time series that are actually measured on these different probes, then we can see that it matches. Of course, it's not a perfect match, it needs to be interpreted, but at least we have already technology which allows us to monitor the time dynamics and the space dynamics of an extremely important soil variable that allows us to produce rice production in a correct way in these areas. Other type of issue, water quantity is of course very important. We need to be able to monitor that. Can we also look to water quality, given the fact that there is a very huge problem with water quality sanitation? Yes, we can. Of course, we can use also optical remote sensing, for instance, for monitoring turbidity or other parameters which are related to the emission spectrum of water. So here you see examples. This is not in Wallonia. It's La Meuse. It's also in the south of Belgium, but it's not the global south yet. So here you see, for instance, a time series of turbidity that has been measured in the Meuse on station where also data were available. The scatter plot gives you some indication about the relation between what we can obtain from remote sensing as compared to a reference sensor. Of course, the match is not perfect. Measuring is also making some errors, so always error contamination in the measurements that we are making. But at least we have already some trends, and the measurements give you some indication about how it works. Can we look to other parameters? Yeah, we can also look to other parameters, like for instance, chlorophyll concentration. Chlorophyll concentration is very often the basis of the primary food production in lakes, for instance. In lakes, if you have algae and chlorophyll present, then you will have fishes. And if you have fishes, well, then you know that this fish production can be exploited. And so here you see, for instance, the data that we obtained from interpretation of remote sensing data in the Lake Tanganyika reservoir. Lake Tanganyika reservoir, which is one of the biggest freshwater reservoirs in the world. It's actually feeding nearly 80 million people in Central Africa. Well, this is, of course, a very important resource, and we can actually monitor the chlorophyll concentration now with the open source data that are available. Here you see again also the time series of the chlorophyll data in this lake. You see typically, for instance, what happens when the season is actually changing, and you see, for instance, that all of a sudden algae blooms pop up. That's related to the hydrodynamics of the system. And this is very precious because it allows us also to look to the time series over long time. So what you see here is, for instance, the time series from 2000 onwards. You can actually see what are the dynamics of the chlorophyll, and you can do trend analysis and to see to what extent this kind of chlorophyll concentrations increases or diminishes. And so also how this basic feed for the fishes increases or decreases in terms, for instance, of climate signals, which of course impact also very strongly the water resources in this area. Another type of approach that we can use in order to use our data acquisition systems is citizen science. Citizen science is actually the principle where we actually engage with the people to collect data on the water resources available, where we use technology like smartphones and internet in order to collect precious information. This can be done for water quality data, for water quantity data, but you need, of course, to have sensors that can be distributed to the people in a very cheap way. So here you see examples of a project that we have done in Tunisia, where we started working on precipitation. So we are collecting with different citizens, farmers, precipitation data. We have here the results, the black dots are actually the reference values, and all the colors are actually the measurements that are done by the farmers. And so it allows us to appreciate that the citizen science data are reliable. And so it gives you a very good information about what's going on in the system. And it is also an inclusive participatory approach. So the people engage in contributing to the science. And that's, of course, very important if you would like to adapt and change the mentality of the people in this area. Other examples, use of smartphone technology for measuring discharges. And this is also working rather well. Or using, for instance, water quality strips. For instance, for nitrate or phosphorus concentration or chloride concentration, we can ask people to make measurements and make a picture of that, transmit it to a server and have a look to that. Later on, we will have also Jean-Pierre Asquin, who will be in the panel, who will definitely talk also about his strips that he is developing for measuring Escherichia coli bacteria in water contamination. And you see that for some of these parameters, it works rather well. So we have definitely the possibility to improve our data acquisition and face the water data challenge with new technology. Something very fastly about irrigation, low technology. What can we do? Well, this is what so what we can do is, for instance, also develop technology that is very cheap, like for instance, irrigation, local irrigation, using this kind of technology that exists already by 4,000 years. So it's called pitcher irrigation. It is not very complex, but it needs, however, it is a technology in the sense that you need to design the good clay pitchers in order to have a good porosity so that it can be compatible with what is needed in the soil and so that it can deliver the water that is needed. But what is interesting to see is that this type of technology is extremely efficient as compared to traditional irrigation technology. So we have, for instance, with this pitcher irrigation, we can increase the efficiency of the use of water with 100%. So it goes from 0.7 up to maximum 7 kilogram per cubic meters of dry matter. So that means that we can make an improvement, and a serious improvement of our irrigation efficiency if we use this kinds of low-cost technology. The last thing that I will show is something low-cost technology for doing sanitation. We have, of course, a tremendous problem of water sanitation all over the world. We could imagine to install drinking wastewater disposal plants all over the world, but that costs a lot. If you see how much time it took already in Belgium for getting our water clean, so this is definitely not a solution that we can do in these countries. But what we can do is using nature-based solutions, like, for instance, these type of artificial wetlands, which actually can very easily also reduce the drinking water, the wastewater contamination. So it is also very simple technology. You need only to manipulate slowly the water fluxes in these plants, measure a little bit the temperature, and so with very low-level technology, you can actually develop something which is very nature-based, which works very well. Like we can see in this type of tables, we can look to the results of the decontamination principles in this low-land technology. Just some key points to end my presentation. Is water a key in the sustainable development agenda? Yes, it is. Can we face the water data challenge? Yes, we can do it with Internet of Technology, open science, remote sensing platforms, and citizen science. Can we face irrigation challenge? Yes, we can do that with low-cost traditional irrigation techniques. And can we face the sanitation challenge? Yes, we can with low-cost nature-based solutions. So I'm very optimistic. Thank you for your attention.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for having me at this conference. As a medical doctor, it's nice to speak at a conference dedicated to engineering, but I will do my best. What I will try to do in this short talk is to discuss the multiple challenges that we are facing when we have to translate biomedical advances into products and solutions for the benefit of patients and citizens in general. And actually, the three main messages that I would like to deliver are in the title of this talk. Scientific convergence. I will explain why we need indeed to combine the skills of people involved in different disciplines, why we need multidisciplinarity to address those challenges. Public-private partnership. Indeed, it's critical to address some of the key challenges that we are facing, and I will take obviously the example of the COVID-19 pandemics. It's critical to align the interests of the public and the private sectors. We already discussed this. And the other important message is that to address the major threats, especially the infectious threats, we must have a global approach. And I will come back to this in the course of this presentation. Now, let's start by discussing health technology. This is a meeting about technologies. And the health technologies which have been used and during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we will need to face the future pandemics. First, biopharmaceuticals, and you are now all familiar with the vaccines that saved probably 20 million of lives during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the point I would like to make about vaccines is that it's really probably one of the best examples of the need for interdisciplinarity. You all know that the most efficient vaccines are the so-called mRNA vaccines. So we need indeed mRNA specialists, and you all know about Dr. Carico, who probably will get one day or another the Nobel Prize. She had to fight for years to convince granting agencies, the NIH in the US, to fund her vision of the possible use of RNA as a tool to develop vaccines. So, but what is less known is the fact that without other scientists, which were from a completely different world, the world of chemistry and physics, those vaccines would never have been developed. And those other scientists were able to overcome one of the major hurdles when it comes to use mRNA as a vaccine, which is to make sure that mRNA is stable after injection and can indeed induce the synthesis of the vaccine proteins that you need. And it's another individual, Drew Weissman, who indeed found that lipid nanoparticles are critical to protect mRNA in those vaccines. And not only they protect the mRNA, but they will also instruct the immune system to develop extremely efficient responses. And actually the responses which are induced by the mRNA vaccines are really unique. Previously, vaccines were unable to induce such potent responses, and that's probably one of the secrets of the success of mRNA vaccine. So regarding monoclonal antibodies, I will not elaborate much, but there also we need different disciplines, and those antibodies should be much more considered. Actually, those were the products which were administered to Donald Trump when he got COVID. And I think that those products will become more and more important in the future. Now, COVID-19 is caused by a virus. So we would anticipate that chemical drugs attacking viruses would be important. And indeed, nowadays we have a product, the brand name is Paxlovid, which is indeed able to directly attack the virus. And there, again, it's another type of scientist that created this new product. Previous slide, please. I don't know why anyway, those chemical drugs were extremely successful previously in fighting other viruses and especially the HIV. It's really after the HIV epidemics that indeed antiviral drugs were efficiently developed, and thereafter other viral diseases were successfully fighted. And now it's the same with COVID-19. Medical devices, we already heard about medical devices. Just think about all the tests that we use to make the diagnosis of COVID-19, you know, the antigenic test, the rapid antigen test, and all these things. And again, there actually we need engineers, we need scientists with other skills to develop those extremely important tools to fight the pandemic. Finally, and we heard already several times in this meeting about ICT, we should not forget that ICT tools are essential to fight the pandemic. Why? Because for epidemiologists, it's very important to follow, I would say, in real time, how the virus is spreading, and for this, ICT is critical. And to give you another example, as you know, during the pandemic, telemedicine developed at a rapid pace simply because, you know, the doctors had to give opinion and even prescribe treatment through the internet. Now, with this example, you already realize the many disciplines that have to be put together to be efficient. And this concept of multidisciplinarity has been very well addressed in this report already in 2016, which was produced by the MIT. I'm sure that the chair of this meeting will be happy to see that this institution where she worked for an important part of her career produced this report. It's extremely well articulated, demonstrating again the importance of bringing together scientists from different horizons to indeed move forward in health. Now, the challenge, as I said, is to translate actually basic science discoveries into products that can be delivered to patients and citizens. And several of these questions were already addressed during this meeting. So I will be rather short on the first points. I would just like to remind you that even if you are a basic scientist focusing on basic science, not interested in future application, you have a societal duty, which is, even if by serendipity you find an important discovery, it's your duty to make sure that this discovery can be translated into products which are beneficial for the society. And there, it's your duty to indeed ensure IP, intellectual property protection. In terms of research and development in the field we are discussing, what we should not forget is the major challenges represented by manufacturing. When you have the drug or the biopharmaceutical that you need to test in the clinic, you have to produce it in significant amount, and this is extremely costly and risky. Now, what is also critical, obviously, is to have approval by regulatory agency. Even if your product is extremely efficient in animal models or in your first experiments in humans, it's critical to make sure that it is safe, and that's a key role of the regulatory agency to ensure that those products are safe before they give their approval. Now, what's very important, it's not sufficient to have approval of the regulators, but you also need in the field of health to have the approval of the payers, at least in countries like ours, where our medicine are largely covered by the social security. And this is a challenge, and which actually will ensure, yes or not, a broad access of patients to these efficient and safe products. And finally, in the field of health, it's very important that even after the product is on the market, you make sure that when large numbers of patients are treated, that the product indeed remain safe, that the so-called post-marketing surveillance. Now, this question was already addressed. It's very important in the field of health that the major threats, we are talking about pandemics, we are talking about antimicrobial resistance, we are talking about dementia. Those are threats which should be fighted by products which belong to the common good. And remember this statement by the Director General of WHO, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And this is something that unfortunately is very often forgotten. And for all these reasons, it's very important to align the interest of the public sector that I just mentioned with the interest of the private sector, where obviously financial considerations are very important. And it's there that public-private partnerships are important. We heard about Clean Sky. Myself, I was the first executive director of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is another European joint undertaking. And on the basis of this experience, I would like to share with you what I consider as very important factor to make those public-private partnerships a success. First, you must have clear objectives when you bring all these partners together, and very often you have to focus on unmet needs, medical unmet needs, and very often on pre-competitive research. You have to build trust between the partners. It's not obvious to build trust between basic scientists and industrialists. You need a balanced governance. You need like a honest broker to solve issues which will appear, especially in terms of intellectual property. Finally, I would like to insist on the role of philanthropic support. At least it's my experience at this initiative that venture philanthropists like the Gates Foundation, like others on autism, for example, have been key to make sure that there is a right equilibrium between the interest of the public and the private sector. And this is certainly something in which we have to do better in Europe. Coming to this, and this will be my last slide, if we consider Europe, we have certainly an excellent basic science, and also the European Research Council is doing a great job in supporting basic science. We have a culture of collaboration. There is a rather good vision of the common good, which allow, this strategy in terms of vaccine procurement across at least the European Union. But we have weaknesses, obviously insufficient investments. We have fragmentation of endeavor, which is linked to the way Europe is built with 27 different member states. And also there is this question of risk aversion, which was already mentioned. So I would like just to end with a sentence of optimism. I think that on the whole, Europe should be in a position to indeed efficiently address in the future, or better address in the future, the different challenges I was alluded to this afternoon. Thank you very much for your attention.
And we have heard in this in the last presentation some topics which are not quite usual in such a kind of conference. We have discussed about open source hardware, which could be extended to not only hardware in the IT system, but which could also be done for a lot of, or I will say, all the technologies. We have heard a speaker speaking about water in connection with agriculture, a bioengineer, and finally, a specialist of medicine. So it is quite important to understand that technology and technological innovation is everywhere, and not only in the classical perimeter of engineers. And the first person I am very happy to introduce is Professor Isabel Huis. Professor Huis is professor in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Science in the Catholic Universiteit Leuven. And I would like to insist on the fact that she is also the chair of the board of health, ethical and social issues of the EIT Health, which is a very important position. I asked to the three panelists to send me one slide with only a few bullet points with the keywords and the key problems they would like to address during this conference. I hope that it will appear in a few seconds or a few minutes. But looking at the bullet points of Professor Huis, I have seen that she's insisting a lot on innovation ecosystem. Innovation ecosystem has been a lot of time repeated and repeated during this conference. But in the particular field of health, Professor Huyss insists on the necessity to build good commercial, a good ecosystem between commercial enterprise, which objective is making money, with non-profit entities, as government, as NGOs. But such kind of innovation ecosystem should also be adapted to the different cultural and development level of the population of the countries. And I would like that you will, Isabel, elaborate on that. Perhaps adding one particular point I like to discuss is the corporate social responsibility of commercial enterprise. It's clear that in the field of pharmaceutical products, the corporate social responsibility of such kind of enterprise is really, really very important. So please, could you explain us a little more what you have in mind when you are insisting on that?
Thanks a lot for this introduction. And also, I'm very happy to be here and to speak to you. Also, as a scientist, I did actually my PhD in the lab and also with basic science. But afterwards, I evolved towards more research doing in the context of policy development, in the context of health. And so that's why I'm also looking backwards to that. In a way, indeed, innovation ecosystems consist of a complex community of different people that work together. And in the context of health, we think of industry and startups and in universities and the governments, but also patients. And I think what is very important in the context of ecosystems and is that in order for them to collaborate and to bring innovations successful on the market and to mean something in society, it is important that these innovation ecosystems are supported by right policies. And here, for instance, the corporate social responsibilities, which policies at companies are very important. And for instance, on stakeholder engagement, a lot of work is still to do. So companies and also actually also other scientists, when they work on new technological innovations, would benefit and actually would need to collaborate and interact with the stakeholders for whom they are developing these innovations. In health, this is especially with the patients. So they need to talk with communities, patient communities, in order to identify their needs, to know their needs, and to direct R&D, which is so expensive, as Professor Goldman also said, into the right direction. But it's not easy to interact with patients, not easy to interact with the field. So therefore, in these policies, there could be, let's say, guiding principles, how to interact with patients and how to interact with scientists and so forth. So there, I think these policies from the companies could also focus on that. And indeed, there is a diversity of many demographic elements in these characteristics of the stakeholders. Patients live here in Belgium, but patients in other parts of the world have potentially other needs. So it is so important when you develop innovations, technological innovations, that you from the start, from the beginning, even in the lab, already interact and think of for whom is this potentially relevant. And even if it is in another part of the world, take those things into account, cultural differences. From a practical point of view, if you are in a clinical development phase, if you think of endpoints in clinical trials, think also towards what is the end population for whom I'm making medicines, and take these relevant endpoints into account. So that is actually I think very important, because for now, the industry, the R&D, whether it comes from the industry or whether it comes from universities of other institutions, is very much supply driven. So when we think it is interesting, when the company thinks it's interesting, when the university thinks this is an interesting topic, it will maybe generate a lot of publications. let's say we invest in it. But that's, in my opinion, not the way to go. I think the way to go is to first identify what are the needs and to drive innovation and R&D more from a demand point of view. And that's actually not easy. Education is needed there. And I think universities can help to guide, let's say, innovators into that direction. And this need-driven approach and also towards unmet medical needs in the context of health is also something which is, I said to here, high on the agenda of the Belgian presidency in the next year of the Council of the European Union. I think that is, may also, yes, save resources and actually point innovation towards the right direction. So that's my intake here in this technology innovation ecosystem. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Now I will ask to the youngest participant of this conference, at least as a speaker. It's Quentin Matthews. Quentin Matthews graduates in mechanical engineering and industrial design in the Technical University of Compiègne in France. And after a very short industrial experience, he has been going to a company which was making more sense for him, the low-tech laboratory. And his first mission has been in Bangladesh, which is quite original. And now, since for 2 or 3 years, he's conducting a project with concerning social organizational models to generalize low-tech way of thinking, doing, and living. But the concept of low-tech technology is not so common in a conference of engineers who are looking for high-tech. So I would like, Quentin, that you will elaborate a little bit on the notion of low-tech and in relationship with the progress of humanity. And I think it will open perhaps the discussion on the technologies for the future. So Quentin, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, works. Yeah, that's my slide. Whoa, I'm the privileged one, has a slide on time. Thank you very much for the invitation and for this introduction, Luc. So yeah, just to quickly tell you about it. There was 2 roll-ups in the pose room about low-tech, so maybe ones from you that got there and read about it will have some kind of sense of retelling it. But within the low-tech lab, we call low technologies a certain type of techniques, but also know-how and practices that goes around principles, strong principles that are important to us. And first one is useful. So it rebounds a bit on the first intervention on how to answer basic needs and real needs instead of inventing needs to drive the production. Then there's a important aspect for us is the sustainable aspect of the techniques and know-how that we search and promote. And it's sustainable in a specific way. We talk about saving resources and energies. So preventing consumption instead of, I don't know, like driving society towards consumption. And the third major principle is about the accessible dimension. So it has to be accessible to all, and whether it be in terms of economical aspect or maybe more important even the fact that it's simple enough for people that will be using it in their everyday life to be able to adapt it, to repair it, to maybe I don't know, like make it evolve for new use. And this is also linked to facilitating autonomy for most of people, whether it be technical autonomy or even economical autonomy, financial autonomy, etc. And so it's interesting because Isabel's introduction was about asking technologies for whom, by whom, and for what. And so I can also introduce low-tech by answering those questions with what we think is important to develop today. For whom, so everyone. By whom, we also have a principle that is subsidiarity. Maybe it doesn't exist in English, but in French, it means the better the solution, the closer the answer, the better the solution. So the ideal version is that the person that is facing a problem has the capacity to answer the problem, or maybe his neighbor or her neighbor. And then for what? Well, it's basic needs, and behind it tells us about sustainable living, way of living. And if I have just one more minute, I can quickly tell you about the difference that we see between lower technologies and frugal innovation, for example, that is usually compared or associated. Well, we try to save resources, whether it be materials, energy, money, but also human resources. So to prevent, you know, effort or labor or I don't know, like a work diseases or things like this. And instead of saving money only, and this makes us always go towards cooperation instead of competition. And so we are based on not only open science or open innovation that are usually good tools to feed, I would say, the competition, but the way we see it, it's really open knowledge and open source, like hardware that the first presentation also tells us a lot about. And the last point, maybe, it's that usually low technologies are associated to DIY, do-it-yourselves. So it's not exactly the Fab Lab movement, because it's really with basic tools that you can find it everywhere, and even in that I could find in my grandpa's garage, I would say. And so those this DIY movement now goes towards more artisanry, and I would say again trying to build local autonomy, collective autonomy, instead of more production and consumption. And so it's not like putting an end to our production model. It's just trying to redesign it, and really it's how to say, it's conveying a lot of new jobs and new opportunities, but only at a different scale. That's what I would say about it.
Thank you very much, Quentin. When we are discussing open science and so on, I can also suggest that you will have a look on the website of the Low-Tech Lab, where you can discover the different low-tech technology which are at disposal with a lot of way to use it. Okay, so I will now ask to Professor Jean-Pierre Raskin to take the floor. Jean-Pierre Raskin is professor at Université Catholique de Louvain, and he's a specialist in microelectronics. And especially I know him as the expert in sustainable hardware. And he's also the founder of a very interesting association, we will discuss further in the panel, which is called Agenio Sud. And in your slide, I see very, very important topics that you would like to address. You insist on the need of a holistic vision of our society, which will allow to develop technologies for the future, and for a sustainable future. And one thing which is for me very interesting and quite new, the characteristic of these technologies for you, that they should be appropriate and appropriable. And I would like that you will elaborate on this concept, and I see clearly a link with the low-tech technologies which have been presented by Quentin. Please, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Luc. Yeah, no doubt, a lot of link with Quentin about the low tech, but also with the three presentations that we heard just before. Yeah, I wrote down here just a few keywords that I think that they are quite important. Open hardware, somewhere it's appropriable technology in my sense. We have heard about IoT. I'm going to share with you one example where IoT could be of interest, but we have to think the way that we implement this technology. And global approach has been mentioned. This is basically what I call holistic approach. Then, yeah, I will talk more about maybe this holistic approach. As you say, Luc, I'm an engineer. I'm a researcher in the field of micro and nanoelectronics, and I'm working on these, nano chip for basically communication and high frequency communication. Has been trained as an engineer. It means that we ask all the time to me to find solution for the market needs. This is quite clear. And we ask me to basically solve problems taking in mind two major indicators. One is the technical performance and the other one is the cost. This is basically what is asked to engineers. Usually we don't ask engineers to step back. We don't ask them to think about what they do. We don't ask them to integrate other indicators when they develop technology, just performance and costs. They don't have time, they don't have the opportunity to think about the impact on the environment or the social justice of what they do. When you do so, you realize that technology is not neutral at all. It has a huge impact on the way that we live. And technology, the second, thing that you learn by stepping back is also that you cannot do alone. Technology cannot do alone. It must work, engineers must work with other experts. And we have to think about the collective way of dealing with different questions of challenges. And this is what I would call holistic approach. We have to define them together some common objectives. We have to really think about these criteria of success and try to think beyond the performance, technical performance, and the economic profit. I would just give you one example. As you mentioned, Luc, I'm quite lucky to work in this course named Ingénieur Sud, and I can talk about this course if you want afterwards. And in the framework of this course, we like to put in collaboration students from our university with students in southern countries. And they have to work on a very clear and real project, real questions coming from companies or associations or NGOs. And just maybe a quick story about students that they had to work in Peru, and they had to, basically the objective was to reduce the use of pesticides on potato fields. Then we gave that scientific question, these technical questions to our students from the engineering school of Louvain, and also to Peruvian students. And they had to work together during one full academic year to exchange ideas and to come up with prototypes. When we met them the first time, they came to us and they say, we have the solution. We have the idea of using drones. We have the idea of disseminating sensors, gas sensors, humidity sensors, pH sensors, whatever, to collect all of those data. And like that, we will be able to help the farmers to reduce the use of pesticide. We were not surprised at all that they came to us with that solution, which is just fully technical solution and use of high-tech solution. I'm not against high tech. I'm working all the time. I have a group of 30 researchers really working on what we can describe as high tech. Okay, we discuss with them and we invite them to step back and think about what they propose and just think about what would be the impact of disseminating all of those sensors in the soil. What about the electronic waste? What about the energy that you will have to use to deploy this network of IoT? And so on and so on. Then they try to introduce all of the other indicators. And after 3 years of work, because we had to put many students on this project to come up with a more sustainable solution, and we end up finally not, okay, in the research phase, yes, in the research phase, it's very important to use all of the tools that we have. Use the high tech. Use the high tech to understand the world in which we are living and to understand all of the challenges. Develop models when you understand what is going on. You develop models, and after you work with those models to define what I would call, you could call it low tech. I would prefer to call it appropriate technologies, appropriate solution to use the right technology for the right objective. And then at the end of the day, we came up with just a weather station and a cardboard, a circular cardboard that the farmer can use, knowing the temperature, knowing the rainfalls, and very simple parameters. They could decide themselves if they have to put or not pesticides on their field. You see, just that story to show you that I'm quite tired to hear engineers coming up with those always the same thing, high tech, with those buzzwords now today, that we have to use artificial intelligence, we have to use 5G, 6G, all of those funny words that are there, of course, to produce more, to be, at the service of this technoliberal society. And this way of behaving is not going to solve the major problems. Yes, I love technology, but they are there to understand the world in which we live, not just to basically increase the production of e-waste, for example, in my case. Yes.
Thank you.
Just a few words.
It is very clear that we should use appropriate technologies, but appropriable.
Yes, and the way that I say appropriable is just that we have to vanish basically the barrier that exists between the users of the technology and the producers. And this is basically what you mentioned also during your talk, is to have the possibility, and also the case for the low tech, and share this open hardware, is be able for people to understand and to be creative by doing, by making. This is quite important to me, yes.
Okay, thank you. And as far as I understand, your holistic approach is quite similar to what Michel explained as a basic need, a transdisciplinary approach of the problem, not remaining in our specialty of engineers. Yes. And I would like that Isabel which is not in the engineering world, could react to what you have heard just from the two other panels.
Yes, I completely agree, and I'm actually also very happy to hear that the holistic approach is taken to in order to come to the right innovation. So not so going beyond just measuring the performance of technology and having the costs analyzed in the end, but also finding out more what are the technological needs and for whom the technology is produced there, and also not only from these people but also from the environmental aspect. So that I think maybe also ask you to collaborate with social scientists or with other types of expertises that maybe in first sight is not yeah, you would not think about this, or maybe other pharmacists. So that is actually a good thing. Eh? So not only just gathering data, but collecting the right data that is needed and sufficient, and not too much and so forth. So just what is needed. I agree with that. And I also like that idea of the combination of high tech, low tech, and that indeed in the research phase, the high tech is needed to have a good view on it, to make models, and for that further on, take it further in the field and put something in the market where people can work with, which is understandable by the people in the fields, and in fact, the agricultures or in different countries, people that have not the exact expertise that can understand these high-tech innovations. So it's good and crucial that you produce something, maybe based on high-tech, but then in the end, something which is, let's say, understandable and manageable by the people in the field from different cultures that they can work with, and that, for also pointed to your point, is sustainable. So that it is not just a one shot that is made, but that actually can produce long-term effects. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabel. And we have heard a very good example of combination of high-tech and very low-tech technologies in the presentation of Mrna. Internet of Things to have a good data collection and using very classical, very old technologies. I think, and it was included in your presentation, that we should be adapted to the different culture and development level of the different countries. And I would like that both of you, Quentin and Jean-Pierre, you could elaborate on what you consider as we have to do in our relationships with the countries of the South, countries which are not so developed as ours. And Jean-Pierre, you already discussed a little bit about Ingénieux Sud, and I think also that in your slide, in your bullet point, Quentin, you insisted on the different way to consider this relationship. So Quentin, perhaps the first to react on that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the quick definition I gave you just before probably gives you an overview of a new way to look at technologies, and that's really what we want to share and spread. It's just trying to change the the mindset, or maybe the filter that we have and the culture that we have, and that we've grown up with. And so, yeah, Jean-Pierre, you said technology is not neutral and it's not necessarily positive. And so in the end, it's also one of the questions that was asked is our relationship towards human progress. And I think, as you said it as also, Jean-Pierre, that human progress, social justice, or nowadays, because maybe at a certain period of time, it was really linked to new knowledge, new discoveries, or basic techniques and systems that we were able to spread, whether it be in our own countries at a certain time and then in other countries. But now I'm sure all of you here are able to tell that maybe technical progress and technological progress is not automatically linked to social progress and human progress. And I was quite impressed during the first sessions that we are still a lot of us talking about new innovation to markets and readiness level for these innovations, and the need of public financing for this innovation and for the industrialization of this innovation. And we don't even know what we're talking about. And of course, I'm sure those solutions have positive impacts or have assets, or I don't know how to say, but probably they have negative impacts, and that we don't even, or maybe not as much as we should look into or try to anticipate, whether it be on social level or environmental level. And I think facing this topic, it's difficult to say that technology or industry or public financing is not politics, but as a matter of fact, it has impact on our everyday life and now on the situation of the global, I would say, on population. And we talked a bit about indicators and what we look, and also Isabel, you talked about it. What we look at it, is it only what it can bring as a cost, efficiency or performance, but also at other things, whether it be happiness or just a possibility to subsist. And yeah, just sorry for this, maybe a quick detour, but to talk about the relationship with the Global South and Global North. We at Low-Tech Lab found a lot of the solutions that we document and try to spread or promote in the Global South, because those contexts are already, I would say, facing constraints and limits way more than our contexts are facing. And they're managing to answer basic needs with common experiences and ingenuity. I don't know if this word exists in English, but ingéniosité is exactly what it's about, instead of engineering. And probably you have way less engineers and way less designers and way less scientifics there, but in the end, they manage to answer their basic needs. Well, probably it's not as efficient as ours, or depending on what you look at. So instead of seeing our responsibility now as what we can bring, and it wasn't supposed to be this line, closing the technology gap in least developed countries, but I changed it and it didn't appear. But yeah, I really don't think our responsibility is to help those poor population to get into our way of life, as we see today that our way of life is the one that is responsible for a lot of crises, whether it be social, economical, or environmental, and even wars. So I would say we probably have a lot more to learn than to teach. And that's what we try to do with the Low-Tech Lab activities. And as a last intervention, but maybe after a turn, I can quickly tell you about an example that the role of the engineers should be or could be, but it can be now or after, as you prefer.
Yes, but we are now running short of time. Huh?
Okay, so I can just tell you about it, and you can find information. One of the countries that already has faced economical collapse and energy limits and no more importation and subsidies, etc., is the island of Cuba, that probably a lot of you see what it's about. And the year after that, it happens in 1989, when the USSR collapsed. The year after that, in 1990 and 1991, a whole team of expert scientists and engineers went on the field to document how people could use their local resources to answer their basic needs, and try to spread it towards two different books, one called The Book of Family and the other one By Our Own Efforts. And now I invite you to look at, for example, the health system of Cuba, probably one of the most renowned by the United Nations or World Health Organization, etc. So that's one example that what engineers and scientists can do to spread knowledge and help people do by themselves.
Thank you, Quentin.
Sorry.
So I will ask a very last question to Jean-Pierre, because we have no time now.
It's maybe better to take the questions.
To continue the discussion, and we are waiting for having a drink. But I think that Quentin is a good example of the new generation of engineers, which are looking for a sense in their job, in their work, and looking for sustainability. And I would like to ask Jean-Pierre very shortly to say at least something about education in our university on sustainable development goals, and how could you raise the awareness of the young engineers according with the different challenges they will have to face?
Okay, I think you look very short. I think that if you want these young generations to tackle all of those systemic crises that we are facing and they will face in the future, and the most important is to be part of project where they will realize by themselves. I think that this is not something that you have to teach in the auditorium. This is the reason that we put in place this course Ingénieur Sud, where you have the students really making a practical project and be in contact with people outside the university and real beneficiaries and blah, blah, blah. Then this is quite clear. We have to make practical project where people can face and experience themselves those difficulties and these challenges. You have just to experience once. You change your mindset, that's it. You cannot see the world the same way. My case, the case of the students.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre. Sorry for the audience, we don't have time now for question, but the objective of this panel was to raise the awareness of the audience on this new way to approach the different problem. And we hope that inside Eurocase, we will have the opportunity to continue such kind of discussion, which is, I think, really, really important for our future of everybody. Thank you all for your attendance and your participation.